On campuses like Princeton, where she teaches, Toni Morrison stands at the center of the debates raging over multiculturalism. Morrison's 6 acclaimed novels exemplify the depth and creativity of African American writing which has until recently been neglected in favor of the traditional white male literary canon. But Morrison's complex renderings of African American language, culture, and history challenge the idea of America as a monolithic culture.
I think my reading had run up against a sort of blank wall, which is to say, I had a hunger for something that was not available to me, which was a kind of literature that was representative of a different kind of culture and a different kind of life and a different language, different kinds of perceptions. It sounds as though I'm saying that there was no literature about Black people or about African Americans, which wasn't true. The literature existed. The history existed, but not taught in schools, not analyzed in schools, almost underground, surreptitious literature. And when it had been written, it wasn't really readily available to me in Lorain, Ohio. And then even that literature was very contestatory, persuasive, and also it seemed to have a voice, an address to someone outside the community, someone outside the culture, as though it were important, and I'm sure they were right, to persuade, convince, display the art or the argument to white people, so that I felt bereft, in a sense, that kind of hunger you feel when you want to relate on a very personal level, visceral, personal, and cultural level to the text. And I think it was really wanting that kind of story that made me first begin to write it, because once I had written it, I would then be in a position to read it.
Morrison sees her real education as the unlearning of those white standards of beauty and value she had internalized.
The education for me was a kind of peeling away of that education, as though to dust off the language and to get it back to its strength and its freshness, its power, its magic. A way of expelling from my work the gaze of the educator who was white, the gaze of the judge who was white, so that I had to step back into that period that you've described as my adolescence and my childhood. What was life like in my imagination when it was contained pretty much within the community? And what did I understand of it then? What was fulfilling and enhancing or problematical or fearful? And those are the things that made up, I think, my education.
Morrison's parents were avid storytellers. She learned from them what she calls truth in timbre. It means the truth of a story lies not only in its facts, but in its telling, its sound, its phrasing, its tone. She recalls her parents' influence.
Extremely important one. They were not helpful when it came to my trying to make up my mind what kind of work I wanted to do, precisely because they were very much involved in very immediate financial concerns. What they provided was something much more valuable, which was the information they gave me in a form in which I received it. Their own narratives, their own anecdotes, their reliance on narrative strategies in order to teach, in order to enhance, in order to shape a moral sensibility. Also, they gave me a language, a powerful, vivid, imagistic language. I'd always been very disturbed because the ways in which African Americans speak English has generally been understood to be not just uneducated or ungrammatical, which is true of many kinds of regional dialects and so on, but to somehow to be diminished in some way. And it seemed to me just the opposite, that all that was powerful and new outside of, I suppose, science and technology that had happened to American English had happened through the language of black people, that it had worked its way into the culture so seamlessly that it was impossible to extricate it, that words in the world that everybody knew, okay, guy, hip, all these words were genuine Africanist words that had been carried by African Americans for generations, in addition to which the way in which they said things, the choice and sequence of words. At any rate, without going into all of these patterns, that power, it seemed to me, was alive, vivid, and worthy of being revered and translated.
Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh, they despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick 'em out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it.
Morrison's richly crafted language is never used for its own sake. For her, art must have an underlying purpose.
I deplore art that is only that. I think that's just a rather fresh, young, new idea that's about 80 or 90 years old, art for art's sake. I think it has to represent the world that the artist inhabits, or somebody inhabits, and it has a missionary quality in it, in this sense. It should enable. There should be some epiphany, some shock of recognition, some way in which one sees clearly. It shouldn't be a solution, necessarily. I mean, this is not an Anacin or an aspirin that takes away a headache. It's to move us a little bit further down a road that might be called toward real civilization. That's what it ought to do.
Toni Morrison's work is a continuing challenge to our television culture of mass distraction. Television's African Americans entertain and divert, and other without a past, without depth, without a world of their own. But Morrison's novels reject the flattened surface imagery of television. She takes the reader deep inside her character's pain. She wants the reader to feel that the voice of the text is really his own.
I wanted to feel, when the reader reads it, as though he is very much involved in all those spaces in the text, and that he is, half a beat ahead of the characters, and that the gaze, the eye, is really his. It's comfortable to be there. It's also a little scary, and it is full of all sorts of terrible things that can happen in the world, and at the same time, because it is his, it's life-affirming.
I'm crazy about this city. A city like this one makes me dream tall and feel in on things. I'm strong, alone, yes, but top-notch and indestructible. Like the city in 1926, when all the wars are over and there will never be another one. At last, everything's ahead. The smart ones say so, and people listening to them and reading what they write down agree. Here comes the new, look out! There goes the sad stuff, the bad stuff, the things nobody could help stuff, the way everybody was then and there, forget that. History is over, y'all, and everything's ahead at last.
I rewrite to make the books look like it all was done in a few hours. Knowing that some part of the culture in its language, whether it's words or music or style or what have you, is not just interesting to and is important to me. But more important is that America is incoherent without it. And I think now there is a readership that understands that the literature of America is incoherent without the contribution of and within of black writers, in the same way that you can't talk about American music if it's indigenous. It is incoherent if you take out all of black musicians and the black music they have produced. So it is a question of really, maybe the time has come in which the denials are so ridiculous that it's no longer possible to make them, and also in which you have a generation now, this is a post-World War II generation, post-Vietnam War generation, in which I don't even think people want to do it artistically anymore. I really think, I find my students, as a matter of fact, here at Princeton, tired of the old constraints that racism has placed on their intellectual life. It really is a straitjacket.
Beloved, for which Morrison won the 1988 Pulitzer Prize, contains a simple dedication. It reads, "To 60 million and more. The 60 million who died in slavery. 60 million ghosts most would like to forget."
This shouldn't be, though. I think our relationship to the past ought to be a little more affectionate. There's no point in throwing out the past simply because it was unpleasant. It's infinite. The past, I suspect, is probably more infinite than the future. The point is that there are lessons to be learned there so that we don't have to do that again. And there's garbage in it also that you can throw out. But it's all information. It's all the way we were. It's all part of who we are. It's avoiding it, pretending it was something else, lying about it, deceiving ourselves about it, whoever we are, that causes the problem of growing up, of being an adult, of occupying the body and the mind completely, even on a personal level, pretending that one had no childhood or that there were not unpleasant things in that is, it just fructifies and paralyzes growth. It also paralyzes the possibility of getting through it and reaching bliss and reaching a level where you really belong in this place. Really belong in this place. And you know that you belong and that there's work to do.
The theme of place and displacement is central to Morrison's work. Her tormented characters must find a place they can call home. Morrison argues in her book of essays, Playing in the Dark, that many white authors constructed a different sense of home. By equating Americanness with whiteness, they helped unify the diverse groups of European immigrants, but in so doing, they wrote black people out of the American experience.
What could possibly make a man from Scotland interested in a man from Greece in a new country? Chances are they would have the same differences that they had in Europe. Would they fight to claim each one that they were more American than the other? I don't think so. What they did was to have readily at their disposal an other, something they were not, that they could all agree on, and deliberately constructed as well as coincidentally constructed was this black presence. And because of racism and racial hierarchy, it was less than. It was not only different from, it was less than. So that somebody in Georgia who had been put there by England because otherwise he was going to be hanged could feel a certain kind of power and identity and superiority over a resident population. Those were black people. So that in that sense, the presence of black people contributed to the notion and definition of an American. You could get off the boat and you learned two words. Well, I don't know what the first one was, but the second one was nigger. The letters that he wrote home, the diaries that he or she kept were full of someone less than he, someone other than he. And it informed the conversation that they spoke to among each other. And defending themselves from, protecting themselves from, or even liberating, because it certainly was true during the 19th century, the other was one of the contributing factors to the Union.
Though suffused with suffering, Morrison's novels stand in contrast to the despair which characterizes so many American institutions. Her characters are troubled, their lives tough, yet they insist on mapping a path through the hurt, even as society impedes or warps their efforts. Morrison forces the reader not only to feel, but to think about the persistence of racism and the injustices which prevent people from surviving whole.
Look at the school system. The public school system in this country is a joke. The reason it is a joke, it's a pen, P-E-N, to hold those children, keep them off the streets, and the children know it, so what they do is ignore it or tear it down. They know it's not serious. It is a joke because it is educating people, children, that they don't care about. The system doesn't care about. Poor rural whites, poor inner city whites, and blacks. So that they have flushed the whole thing down the toilet. Now tell me that's not wasteful for the future of a country that will need a certain kind of educated human being.
Everybody in the world was in a position to give them orders. White women said, do this. White children said, give me that. White men said, come here. Black men said, lay down. The only people they need not take orders from were black children and each other. But they took all of that and recreated it in their own image. The hands that felled trees also cut umbilical cords. The hands that wrung the necks of chickens and butchered hogs also nudged African violets into bloom. The arms that loaded sheaves, bales, and sacks rocked babies into sleep. And the difference was all the difference there was.
Love is some human response to chaos and to universal intelligence as well as universal chaos. It really is spiritual. It really is sensual. It really is intellectual. It's all of those things. This struggle that human beings have between being absolutely unique, no one else like me, no clone of me, no one has my fingerprints, no one has my voice print, very important, is coupled with this other absolutely important desire to belong to something bigger than oneself. And we see those as conflicts. Complete solitude and singularity is sometimes in conflict with this desire to belong to a nation, a family, a world of mankind. I don't think they're either or. I think they're just part of the range of what human experience is. And without love, it is unintelligible. Unintelligible.
Toni Morrison has a vision. It is an America where difference is not feared but celebrated.
My dream, which I really like to talk about, is that for once and for all we can get rid of those awful notions of melting and merging and becoming, I don't know, mayonnaise, I guess, and begin to recognize the value of a variable culture, and that it won't be a pejorative. It will just be more possibilities, more areas for making life in this country rich. The problem is not variety or difference. The problem is hierarchy. in ranking difference. The problem is in punishing differences. It could be magnificent. It could be the Founding Fathers' ideal language without their enlightenment, age of enlightenment language, as opposed to the age of scientific racism language that is already there in that instrument known as the Constitution. But you have to take out all the fear of not being a whole person if you live next door to a Chinese person. You have to take out a fear of maybe an Asian or a Native American will know something you don't, or an African American. You know, you have to give it up. You have to surrender all of these false, very tenuous, but nevertheless brittle support systems for being white. Once that goes, once white goes, I think the whole problem is over.